You're watching the station that works for you. Now, ABC2 News at 6.
It's been a violent start of the year for us. The city closed January with 26 lives taken with guns and knives, and no police district in the city was spared.
East, west, south, every part of the city experienced at least one homicide. So tonight, ABC2 News investigator Brian Kubler sits down for a frank interview with Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Batts.
You can pick a murder scene, any scene, and the reaction is almost always the same. Someone heard the shots, another person can't understand why, and yet another stands on their stoop as they color in the lines of the yellow crime tape with insecurity and fear. The start of 2014 is violent, but Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Batts wants to look beyond just the one number.
You have to put some context to what's happening. Much like what I shared with you, this is just not random shootings that are taking place throughout the city and that everybody should run for their lives. It's concerning, but it's because we had some background incidents that took place over the first 3 days in the new year and over another 4 or 5 days in the new year, and we believe they may be connected.
Commissioner Batts cannot share with us why his detectives think many of these homicides are connected, but says there is some method to the madness of January. It's a narrative the police department continues to build through its investigations, but it cannot explain away the numbers or justify the loss of life in Baltimore, nor is it meant to. Part of healing is outrage, and you often see it in other communities. But in Baltimore, at the time of this interview, 22 lives were already lost.
Where is that similar outrage over 22 people killed in this city in 1 month?
I think that outrage is clear. I think it's clear with the residents. I think it's clear with the bosses here. And in most part, it's clear with me. What you don't get to see is my meetings with my command staff. What you don't get to see is what my standard is within the organization. I have no tolerance for 22 lives lost in the city. It makes me angry.
But the commissioner's standards on homicide are scientific, almost a sterile approach to a crime that elicits so much passion. Murders are victims, are lives, but when policing in a major metro, the commissioner also knows numbers are crime stats, are headlines.
If you're having about 23 homicides, that's going to put you in the high 200s. If you're around 20, that's going to put you in about the 220, 230 realm. You have 17, it's going to put you in the low 200s. What we're focusing on and pushing for as an organization is closer to about 15. Now that's a high standard, and that's the standard that I want, and that's what I push for as a whole.
But the rising trend of homicides in the past year and a half and so far in 2014 continue to dominate the storyline, taking away from a narrative the commissioner feels he cannot successfully push in the media.
You can beat us up or you can beat me up about the homicide rate. I get it. I got it. I'm just as upset about it as anybody else. But there's a lot to be proud of in this organization. If you look at those numbers, and I'm going to give this to you, Brian, if you look at those numbers and see where we've come from, those are dramatic trends. We continue to go down. Crime continues to go down.
Batts is talking overall violent crime since 1985. In those almost 30 years, that number has dropped 44%. Robbery by more than 50 and aggravated assaults by more than 30. Property crime in that same time dropped 40%.
It is also important to note that since 1985, Baltimore has lost about 19% of its population. Still, the commissioner believes the department is headed in the right direction and winning the war on violent crime. But with a high-profile murder in Highlandtown, an assault in Canton, and an armed robbery of a popular bar here in Federal Hill, he may be struggling to win the battle of perception.
It's more glamorous to say, run for your lives, the city's on fire. The city continues to progress and go in the right direction. It is getting safer. Now, when we deal with that homicide rate, that's going to turn its way around, too, at the same time. And there's reasons why that homicide rate spiked on us last year. And what my job is to correct those reasons and get them online.
One of those reasons the commissioner is convinced is gangs. Even as his own department's murder numbers reflect the opposite. In 2013, only 30 victims of the 235 murders were identified as gang members, as were only 19 of those pulling the trigger. According to the department's own numbers, far more violence was committed with handguns and by those with previous criminal records, or as the previous administration called, bad guys with guns. a focus Batts' critics believe the city should return to.
Is the problem not repeat violent offenders and handguns violations?
I don't think there's a differentiation. I think it's
Or
both.
gangs.
I think it's both. I think it's the same thing. A lot of our repeat offenders are gang members. And you have to get the definition of what a gang member is. And how I use that in a very loose term, just for us talking here one-on-one, is any group that comes together for the purpose of doing criminality or committing crimes.
Batts is not only tasked with retraining a force that largely ignored the gang term for years, but redefining what it means and anticipating the reason for the violence before it ends up in the homicide rolls. A process the commissioner knows will take time.
It's just like when you're playing football. If you change and you change your blocking scheme, or you change what you bring to the playbook, it takes a skip for the organization to get that, to understand it, and to work within it.
Currently, that skip is a murder spike, but Batts is firm that his plan will work for this department and this city, saying no matter how much pressure he takes, he will not move off that plan. In Baltimore, Brian Kubler, ABC 2 News.
The commissioner's plan is outlined in an almost 200-page report released last year. Now, in part, the plan calls for a refocusing to go after the worst of the worst criminals in Baltimore. The commissioner also wants to give the department a massive technology upgrade to make it more efficient and more responsive.